Hello, how are you?
I'm fine. How are you doing?
Doing well, doing well. 1 second here, I'm trying to stay setting up your meeting. Hello, how are you?
I'm fine. How are you doing?
Doing well, doing well. All right. Yeah, the I gotta go to the burn unit every day.
They cleaned it up.
Yeah, they clean it up, and she today she pulled all the dead skin off. This is gonna hurt. I had to act like, there's a bunch of women there, so I'm like, yeah, no, it don't hurt. No, it don't hurt.
Yeah, you could
She says,
pass.
I
You
know it
could
hurt.
pass.
Passing big time. No, it don't hurt. He's like, yeah, I know it hurts. Oh, no, it don't hurt. Yeah. Stupid mistake.
Hey,
Yeah,
but pain is
so
good. I told you. Pain is good.
yeah, pain is good. Pain is
Yeah.
good. I learned a lesson. Learned a lesson.
What did you do? Was it oil or was it water or your radiator? What
Yeah,
was it?
so basically we were out with the Boy Scouts, and this is my time. This is my first time with the older crew. The older crew, they have to cook on these little camping stoves. So I didn't realize that they have them cook on a table, and that's dangerous. You got these 9-year-olds and 10-year-olds, clumsy. So I was trying to manage them. Hey, look, we're gonna do this by the numbers one by one because I didn't want them, burning themselves. So some kids didn't have their own food, so I had them bring hot dogs, which were frozen. So with one kid was frying burgers with grease.
Mhm.
So so I'm trying to manage and direct one kid, and the other kid's like, "Can you put my hot dog on?" So I inadvertently took his hot dog and
It's
put
frozen.
it in, which was frozen, in the pot with the grease.
And you had a little Hiroshima go off.
So I said, "Wow!" So I had to play it cool, like, "Hey, can you take over the crew for a second? I'll be right back." uh Lesson learned,
Yeah,
we
happened. Yeah.
lesson learned. Today we're gonna talk about teaching reading.
All right.
Teaching reading. This is gonna be a short one, but
Yeah.
a very important, because reading is so important. In fact, it's interesting that we even talk about this today because I've taken over a um a chain of schools here in Riyadh. So it's two, but it's called the Hay brand. It's a Finnish model. So I'm the general manager. I just started yesterday.
All right.
And so I
Congratulations.
went in, we'll see.
That'll be all right.
So it's the challenge is they actually have Finnish trainers in there and lead teachers, and which is a good thing. Um and they want to do it the Finnish way, right? Which I understand. That's why they're there. But as you know, especially things like education and curriculum, you can't take something from Finland and just put it into Saudi. It has to be customized and modified. So that's where they're at now. What modifications, the person who's in charge of academics specifically, they have their own ideas, which is nowhere, and they don't understand the Finnish model. The parents have bought the Finnish, have obviously enrolled their children, but they don't understand. No one did a good job in explaining what the Finnish model is. So they're expecting more of a traditional system, and the Finnish model is not very traditional at all. So I have to come in and try to clean all this stuff up. And the interesting thing is a lot of different parties. There's a lot of different stakeholders that I have to kind of get everyone to meet in the middle. The good thing about it is everything is there, right? I read the operational plan yesterday. Everything is there. It's just getting everybody to communicate and meet in the middle. It's not like I have to create systems. The systems are there. I just got to get people to use the systems that are there. So, and communicate better.
Okay.
So that's, and the reason why I mention that is because the parents want the kids to read. The kindergarten parents want the KG2s and the KG3s to be able to read.
Right.
And that's actually a reasonable expectation. It's actually a reasonable expectation, because I know in American schools, we try to get kids to read as early as possible,
Right.
because reading is linked to everything, right?
Right.
However, the Finns don't feel that way.
Mhm.
The Finns don't teach reading until the first grade.
The first grade.
The first grade. So the Finns believe that kindergarten should be more just play. You know, the outcomes are, you know, they have this term called transversal competencies, and which are not very well defined. I looked it up because I said, what's a transversal competency? And then as I looked it up, you know, it's basically soft skills, or skills that we use in every aspect of our lives, right? Being able to communicate, negotiate, you know, things like that, being patient, basically emotional intelligence stuff. And so that's what they're really focusing on in the kindergarten years. And the Finns are not, you know, like in America, we have Common Core standards, as you know, which is standard 1B, student will be able to identify the letter A. You know, everything is broken down into, and the Finns are not like that. So when I say, can I see the Finnish standards? They're like, yeah, we have standards. And I'm looking for the standards. Well, it's there. Like, well, that's not standard, right?
It's written in crayon, huh?
So I think that's where a lot of the breakdown is because the Finns have a way of doing things that is unique to their culture, and it's really holistic to their culture. This is why they can, you know, they can have a naked woman on television in the middle of the day, and nobody gets upset about it because it's just a part of their culture, right? I think that's where the breakdown is, and that my biggest role will be to get the teachers to the other challenge is the teachers in KG, although they have early childhood degrees, they may not know how to teach reading. Teaching reading is actually a skill. It's a specialty. I mean, you can actually get a degree in teaching reading, because it's a skill. It's an art. And some of these young teachers, and all of them are very young, they may not understand the skill behind teaching reading. So that's another challenge, right? So we got the Finns who don't want to teach reading. We got teachers who don't know how to teach reading, and we have parents who want their kids to be able to read. You know, both of my kids went to an early childhood school, and they were reading in a couple months. I mean,
Right.
just read, because there's a strategy to it. And if you know the strategy, like I don't even really know the strategy for young. I know for older, but for young kids, I don't even know that strategy. It's a strategy to it that I'm not even aware of, because I'm not a elementary teacher. I'm middle and high school. So credentialed middle and high school. So I'm not aware of that strategy. And that strategy is just amazing to me. And so all I've heard from the Finns over the last 2 days is, well, kids that age, you know, age 3, 4, and 5, their brains are not developmentally ready to read. It's not true.
But they don't start reading immediately. Like I remember my daughter, she's in 3rd grade now. So I recall we went through the stage of the alphabet. And even then, it was more like she memorized, the song of the alphabet, and then she would just like break it down. We tell her this is the A and this is the B, go like that. And then it got more complex, where they
Right.
had stories or sentences, and again, she couldn't read them. You know what I mean? But she memorized them, and it was a mix between memory and between what it should look like. And we were in that gray area for like, yeah, a good part of a year before she started to actually, I can break the word apart, or I can put a word and tell her what's that, and she would know what it is. And now
And
she can
that's why
read.
it's,
Yeah.
and that's why it's important to engage reading at an early age. And this is why it's important to for parents to take responsibility in teaching their kids how to read. Put books in front of them, even if they're just looking at the words. That's very
Yeah.
important. This is a big challenge with this thing, right? This thing actually, I think, is going to do more to hurt reading than this, because this there's something about going like this. There's something about it, that textile, that brain hand connection. Because we're seeing reading scores drop even in Finland, which typically have high PISA scores. And I think it has something to do with the technology, which is a good segue.
Yeah.
It's a good segue, because the first thing on my notes here is that reading is a mystery. We really don't know how we read. We really don't know the science, but we know how to teach reading, but we really don't haven't fully grasped what's going on. It's something like you just said, it just like magically happened. It's the same thing with language acquisition. We really don't know. We really can't time the point in which you will learn a language. It's like you go from como está, de donde eres, to come on star, me amo Ray Roberts, in where it's just fluent. Do you know in which that point, you don't even know that point in which you went from not knowing what was going on to just fluently speaking? We don't know. It's not like, a bell rings and okay, you're ready now. It just happens. And the same thing with reading. Reading just happens. But we do know now, because of brain imagery and MRIs and things like this, we know more than we ever known before, thanks to technology, and mainly MRIs, right? They scan the brains, right?
Signals. Yeah. They can.
Yeah. So
There's electroencephalography, which gets the signals in the brain and tells you what's working, what isn't working.
MRI scans have taught us a lot about what happens during reading, and that's why we have these things. This is just a byproduct of brain research and MRIs. That's why we call it smart technology, because we just take those findings and we apply it to what we call smart devices now. Yeah. But what we do know is reading is not how I learned how to read or how I was taught, which was, all right, boys and girls, open up your notebooks to page 149 and read the paragraph and answer the questions on page 150. We know that's not reading, right? And I would offer, as somebody who had that type of instruction, and although I scored well on comprehension tests initially, as I went up in grade level, I started to do poorly in reading, because number one, where I was from, boys weren't encouraged to read. It was like a girls thing. We went out and played sports and girls read. So there was a point, I was at that point where boys weren't really encouraged to read. And I struggled a while in reading comprehension. Although initially I did well. And I think that has something to do with elementary school, and then middle school just being a total flop, right? But most of my instruction in middle school was open up your pages, your book to page 149, answer the questions on 150. And we
Right.
know that's not reading. What reading really is preparing your students to read. The same theory when we talk about teaching listening and teaching speaking. It's preparing your students to read, setting setting context, um, um, uh, making sure students understand concepts like co-location, which we talked about before, right?
Right.
Context, co-location, inference, context clues, all of which, and I think this is where the Finns will argue that they're right. The Finns want to say, right, that's what I'm talking about. In elementary school, we teach context clues, we teach this and that, and we teach meaning, and that prepares them for when they get to the first grade, they can dive into this thing called reading, right? And I think an American would argue to the Finns would be, well, when you're teaching context clues and you're teaching sight words and you're teaching co-location and all these things, you are teaching reading. So I think both pedagogical positions are correct. It's just the idea of when you do these things. The Finns believe kids should start school at 9 o'clock. I just learned that today. They don't believe in early school day, later school day. Whereas I know in America it's early school day, right? In Saudi, it's a very early school day, right? Like sometimes students start at 6:30 in the morning, which I think is a little too early.
No, that's really early. Like 7:30,
Yeah.
I think it was. I remember 7:20, 7:30, something like that. When I was like,
yeah, 7:20. I think the school bell rung, and I think class started at 7:45, 7:45, something like that. So teaching reading means preparing your students to read. The same thing like we talked about in teaching listening is making sure we front load things, that they understand context, and we tell them what they're about to read so they can understand the main idea. They can understand lexis. And more importantly, they can understand the context so they can predict. Because as you know, prediction is a big part of reading. It's a great part it's a very important part of reading is be able to predict, be able to infer what may happen next. If you don't front load main idea, some lexis and context, students will not understand what they're reading. And I think Islam is a great example of this, right? I know a lot of Americans who cannot speak Arabic, cannot read Arabic, but they can recite the Quran.
yeah,
They don't, not just Americans. I've seen Pakistanis, and I'm like, oh man, I didn't know you know Arabic. I know you know Arabic. No, I don't know Arabic. What you just? Yeah. But they can recite, right? Yeah. So we know that reading the words is not reading. That's just recitation. Recitation, reciting what they hear, and that's not reading. Reading is understanding the main idea, getting a gist of the information, understanding context, understanding lexis. Right?
What do you mean by lexis? You use that term a lot.
Lexis, great. I was about to ask you, you know what lexis means. Lexis means word chunks, words in chunks. So we have co-location, right? And that's where in co-location and co-text, right? That's the location of words. Lexis is the meaning of words in chunks, which which of course is in the beginning, yeah, that's lexis, right? Chunks of words that we use all the time, and those chunks we know. Oh, in the beginning, we know that these are signals for something that is starting or beginning, or the epicenter of something, right? normally dramatic, right, in the beginning. So that would be lexis. Lexis is word chunks. So the meaning of words in chunks, which normally create context or help to create context.
Okay.
So when we talk about teaching reading, we have to make sure that students are ready to read. Okay, because there's a psychological aspect to it. Goes back to our friend Crashing, which is what theory was that? Our friend Crashing?
Funnel theory.
The effective filter, right? The
Effective
effective filter, right? Which is funnel. It's the funnel. People create a funnel on it. So if the students are not psychologically ready to read, there's a great possibility that they won't understand. And this makes a lot of sense because if you look at PISA scores, if you look at Pearl scores, all right, Pearls is the fourth grade reading test. PISA, I know you know what PISA is. If we look at the scores, tell me what traditionally happens, especially in the reading side of these scores.
I don't know what PISA is.
PISA is the international test. That's how they rank what country has the best school system, basically, or the better school system.
For reading. For
reading and math and science. I think it's a combination. It's the organization is OCED, and they do a combination of, this is how they say, you know, America is good in reading, but not in math and not in science. So it's a combination of reading, math, science, reading, math, science. I think it's reading, math, and science. Reading, math, and science, I believe.
There is that thing that reading, writing, and arithmetic. It was an American. Was it Stanford? Stanford reading, writing, and arithmetic.
Yeah, like but the international test, the big one is PISA. There's a lot of research, and that's what normally people point to, like defends the day. She's like, yo, this is why we scored so high on the PISA test. You know, that's the assessment. That's the assessment that everybody kind of turns to as our country. Our kids are smart, right? Normally, America is normally in the middle of the pack because we do so poorly in math and science. Well, I think we do okay in science, but poorly in math for sure. Whereas China is doing very well in math, you know, and then you got Poland, Finland, all these Nordic countries, Eastern European countries that are doing very well on the exam, or the assessment rather. But interesting enough, if you look at, when we talk about preparing to read, making sure students are prepared to read, if we look at countries who do poorly on the test, there's normally a financial element. These countries are normally war-stricken. These countries are culturally, they might not have practice culturally, may not be pedagogically sound when we're talking about learners being prepared to read. For example, Saudi Arabia. Kids go to sleep very late here. Right? You go to the mall on a school day right now. You know, I know in America, well, it used to be, I haven't been home in 10 years. I don't know. That place is getting crazy now. But I know it used to be, before I left, at 7:24, what's the day, Monday? You won't see any kid in the mall, right? And if you did see a kid in the mall, the first thing you're thinking is, this kid should be home doing their homework or preparing to go to bed. Right. That's how it used to be. I don't know how it is now. I haven't been home in 11 years. But normally America, or hopefully it still does, have a culture of at least the kid being home, preparing for the school day. Putting them to bed early, you know, and maybe when you're in high school, junior year, you kind of stay up later or whatever. But elementary kids, kindergarten, middle school kids, they're going to bed. They're going to be about 7 or 8. So when they get up in the morning, they're psychologically, their mind is rested enough to be able to accept the information that's being provided to them. And if you look at low income areas where maybe the parents are not making sure the kids go to sleep at the appropriate times, we see a dramatic decrease in the reading score. You know, Also, they might have psychological issues, their diet, what they're eating. I remember as a school teacher, like we said, class starts school, kids come in around 7:20 in the morning. They're coming in with, you know what a chicken box is? Have you ever been to America? So in
Yeah.
America, in the Black community, this thing called a chicken box. And it's literally a box, okay, with greasy chicken wings and French fries, salt, pepper, ketchup, okay? And you know what happens when you eat greasy food and you're trying to listen to this, right? Right? And kids would come in the morning with a freshly cooked chicken box. And I would ask them, where are you getting a chicken box at 7 o'clock in the morning? And they would say, well, the restaurant's open. And and you go, wow. Because how I know as an educator, it's going to be hard for me to keep their attention now, because biologically they're going to be tired. That grease and that food is going to drain them down, and they're not going to be willing to accept the information. That's a cultural problem.
No,
Whereas in a suburbia America, the kids eating oatmeal or carrot, or a very light lunch, and the kids ready to embrace that information. You were about to say
I'm
something?
just wondering. Yeah, when I went to school in the States, we had a cafeteria. I remember I never carried a lunch. I just went straight to the cafeteria, and I remember they used to give us milk and
Mhm.
use like a sandwich, I don't know, salami or whatever, and there would be something, on that tray. So it looked pretty good. I don't know what happened, why they stopped that.
And then they still do breakfast, but a lot of kids they want to be cool. They don't eat that breakfast. They want to eat the chicken box, and they want to eat the greasy food.
Okay.
And and you also talk about, in that community, we're talking about mama or grandmama or auntie is probably not cooking, consistently every day breakfast, because she's working, right?
You're right.
So she doesn't get home until 10 o'clock at night. And so she's saying, okay, I left $5 on the table, go to the corner store or the corner restaurant and get yourself a chicken box.
Mm.
All right.
So that's for
So
breakfast.
and that's for
That's instead
breakfast.
of breakfast. Okay, okay. Plus, some
And
people, their
instead of
parents work
instead of that
early
milk,
morning shifts and things like that. Like people have to be to work at 6. We have people like
right.
that in our organization, so it's understandable.
Well, it's not understandable in that it's a cultural problem, in that it creates, when you send the kid to school, you're putting the kid at a disadvantage, the learner at a disadvantage, because you're contributing to their get down, you stupid cat. You're contributing to their you're decreasing their opportunities to
But
be
if she
successful.
knew that, and if she had another choice, don't you think she would have gone for that other choice, or he would have gone for the other choice? It's 7 in the morning.
Yeah,
The chicken guy's
yeah,
open.
yes, and yes. I absolutely agree with what you're saying. However, schools tell parents, don't feed, we send newsletters out, don't have your kid eat a chicken box in the morning, and this is why. But on the same token, I agree with you in that she don't have any other choice, right? She doesn't have any other choice, and that is the only place that's open. And there's no healthy option in the hood of Detroit or the hood of Baltimore or the hood of DC. There's no healthy option, and she has to get to work to pay the rent. I get
Right.
it. So it's like,
It's difficult. Yeah.
it's very difficult, because you can also make that argument that it's willful ignorance too, because you're being told that this is at a detriment. It's the same thing with diabetes, right? We in the African American community, we have a huge problem with diabetes, and there's, for all since I can remember, there's a lot of money in advertisement to say, hey, you got to eat healthy, you got to do this, you got to exercise, you can't eat 10 chicken boxes a day, right? You can't drink 20 sodas a day, and but we still do it. And then people who are and then they get tested and they pre-diabetic and they still won't do it. And then they get diagnosed with, what is it, diabetes? What is it? Diabetes
Type 2. Like
type
they call it
2,
type 2. Yeah. No.
type
Late
2.
onset.
Right. And then they still won't, they still will continue to eat the chicken box, and the doctors are
Right.
saying, please stop it. And then next thing you know, they're at the renal center
Amputate.
doing their
Or the
dialysis
renal.
and they're getting their legs cut off. And so at what point is it I don't have any other choice versus I got to make the proper choice, right? So it's a slippery slope, right? It's a very slippery slope because again, these guys in these neighborhoods, they don't have healthy options. I mean, they're literally, Michelle Obama called them food deserts, right? Because I can, if I think about the neighborhood that I grew, one of the neighborhoods I grew up, or the neighborhoods I grew up in, one neighborhood there was that I grew up in, there was a supermarket right across the street. The other neighborhoods I grew up in, there wasn't a supermarket I'm talking about a bona fide supermarket for miles, 10 miles. Now you're talking about people who don't own vehicles.
Right.
And what are you going to do? You're going to take $500 or $300 worth of groceries on public transportation? You're not going to do that. So you're going to go to the local corner store,
Right.
and buy stale and frozen, stale bread and frozen food, and you're going to go to the corner Korean shop or Asian shop or whatever nationality. And the sad thing about it is the people that's selling the bad food would never give that food that they're selling to their kids. They'll never have their kids eat that, right? And nor do they live in the neighborhood.
Right.
So it's definitely an issue, and ultimately the cycle continues. Why? Because we know based on research, if children are not on level in reading, they're more likely to be in prison, go to jail, reoffend, have high recidivism rates. In fact, this is an actual fact. Do you know how they know how many jails they need 20 and 30 years out? You know what data they use?
No, I would assume that they just go by the crime rate and then the conviction rate, and then like that, and build on that, and population growth.
They go by 4th grade reading scores. They take the 4th grade reading scores, and that will determine that they can project out how many prisons, how many jails they need, how many police officers they need. Reading is powerful. That's why the pearls, which directly deals with reading, is what grade? 4th grade.
4th grade.
And we give this test all around the world. Why 4th grade? Because because we know that by 4th grade, if the student cannot successfully read, they're pretty much going to have struggle without major intervention. That's why they choose the 4th grade. They don't choose the 5th. They don't treat the 1st grade or 5th grade, 8th grade. In fact, there's nothing after the 4th grade. There's nothing after the 4th grade, because 4th grade is the magical grade. 1st grade is the grade where students learn the most, is in the 1st grade. 4th grade is the grade where if they haven't learned it, it's bad news for that learner or that community. 4th grade scores. So this being psychologically prepared for learning, for reading, is I know I gave a kind of a long down the street answer or statement, but it's so important that when we get learners, especially young learners, but even adult learners, they have to be prepared to read. You cannot yell at a child or a learner or anyone and then say, turn to page 149 and read and expect. The people have to be psychologically ready. So our job as educators is prepare them to read. They have to be relaxed. They have to be settled. Then we have to consider whether they will understand what they will read. Is it appropriate? How much is it? Right? Are you asking a fourth grader to read 5 pages? How many words are on the pages? What is the frequency of the words? All right. Are the words high frequency words that they're reading or low frequency words? Now, let's say a second grader, how do we want to have in the reading, high frequency words or low frequency words?
High frequency.
High frequency words, because these are words that are most often used in the language, right?
Right.
Low frequency. So for first graders, kindergartners, we need to have as many, in fact, all high frequency words. The cat in the hat. This is why Dr. Seuss is so important in learning how to read, right? It's the cat in the hat. And Dr. Seuss doesn't have, unless it's for older kids, he doesn't have any low frequency words, right? It's all high frequency words. A lot of times they're sight words, right? It's sight words important, just like you said about your daughter. There's the words the kids remember. Sight words. These are the words, because these are the words that we know are probably going to be in a text. The, at, on, right? So when we selecting a reading selection, we have to take a lot in consideration. How many words is it? How many pages is it? The word count, whether the words are high frequency, whether they're going to be interested in what they're reading. All right. Can you give a third grader an essay on Russian czars? Right? Unless that kid's a genius, they're probably not going to be interested in Russian czars. Probably not, right? So that's another issue. That's another important factor. So there's a lot of things that we must consider when we talk about teaching reading. This is why, when I first started teaching, there was a program, and hopefully they're still doing it. It's called DARE. Drop everything and read, right? Because that was a program designed to ensure that students were reading frequently and reading things that they were interested in, right? So we would tell the students, bring comic books, as long as it's not adult stuff, don't bring any nudie magazines, right? As long as it's not adult stuff, bring anything you want to read. And because we wanted to make sure that they had time in that day reading something they were interested in, not just reading on the textbook. We can't assume that the text in the textbook is something they're interested in.
Absolutely.
Okay. Preparing them to read, previewing activities. To familiarize themselves with the context. All right. And remember, this is the situation what students can imagine. Right. Going back to mention crashing again, these comprehensible inputs. Right. That are what's the two? You remember the 2 factors for comprehensible inputs? It must be what?
Comprehensible inputs.
Remember, it must be
relevant,
understandable, and what?
Is it relevant or
and interesting?
Okay, so it's basically around the word relevant, but okay, understandable and interesting.
Right. So students they should be understanding what they're reading, and it should be interesting, right? It should be interesting, right? Okay. They should be interested in the topic. Any reading activity should start at a point where something, a concept or a topic that they already have some basic knowledge about.
Okay.
But we don't want to give somebody, again, that's why we don't want to give a third grader, maybe a fourth grader, a text about Russian czars. Unless of course they're from Russia, right? Maybe
Right.
they already know culture. But we don't, because most people, most third, fourth, fifth, sixth graders, even 12th graders, probably won't have a point of reference on Russian czars in Saudi Arabia or in the UK or in America or in Canada. So that's probably not a good text to get students to read. You know, and if they are reading about Russian czars, it's probably in history class, and the history teacher has has segued into Russian czars. So there's a lot of previewing and background. He's prepared himself for that unit, right? And this is why, because you think about it, history and science are nothing more than reading classes. But we call it history class because the history teacher should be setting what? Context that segues world history, and everything. Each unit should segue and support the previous unit or the next, or that unit should support what's going to be taught next, right? And not disjointed. So there should be a pathway. If I'm teaching history and I'm teaching Russian czars, then all the units before that unit sets the stage for me to teach about Russian czars. And so to get there, the first unit is going to be something that they know about, that they have a point of reference. Going back to crashing again, I+1. We talked about that, right? I+1. You know, adding on information, I+1. Start with the student's prior knowledge, and then add on.
Okay.
Right? In a pathway. That's why we call it curriculum, because that's what a curriculum is. In Latin, curriculum means pathway. All right. So we have to start with something they already know. Another consideration when we talk about reading is more than the language or the words that are on the page. You know, I know I've contradicted myself because I talked about high frequency words and lexes and all that stuff, but it's actually more than that. It's also a chemical language. And that's why reading is universal, because it's a chemical language. So we need to be able to help students tune in to that chemical thing that's happening. So a very important part of teaching reading, is in making sure that students know how to pronounce the words. There is a connection between reading the words and comprehension. There's a connection there. So being able to correctly pronounce a word and comprehension, there's a connection, and that connection is one of chemical. It's one of chemistry. To put it in better perspective, as I'm working out, you know, I'm watching a lot of videos about working out, and I was watching this video with Arnold Schwarzenegger. And Arnold Schwarzenegger used to have this, I forgot the guy's name, Roy something. It was his workout partner. And what they would used to do was they would touch each other's parts of the body that they were working out. So if Arnold was benching, the guy would touch Arnold's chest. And what they knew was that would send a message to the brain that this is the part I need you, that I'm trying to build. Right? So it's more than just it's also the touching. So when you see guys doing curls, they would do this. You see them do this, right? Touch that bicep or touch their tricep, right? Because they're sending that chemical message to the brain. And the same thing happens with reading. There's a chemical, so we got to make sure that it's very important And we normally see this if you taught elementary school or middle school before, even high school, maybe even seen this in university. Students who can read well normally can comprehend well. Students who have a problem with and struggle with pronouncing words normally have a problem with comprehension also.
True.
There's normally a connection there. It's normally a connection there. Okay. Being able to define the words they're reading, obviously that makes sense. Being exposed to many different ideas. So students who are have a diverse mindset, students, this is why students who have lived in many different countries, they tend to have a broader scope. The scope is much wider, and it actually helps them be able to read and comprehend what they're reading. Okay. Also, it's very important when we're talking about teaching reading. It's also important that we set aside time for students to talk to one another. Because as I've always say, they will, Cat, if you don't get off my table, students will learn more from each other than they will ever learn from the teacher. Because when the one kid goes, hey, look, yeah, we went to Greece last summer, and da 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 da. The kid's way more receptive to each other than when you go, well, I took my family to Greece. The kid's like, right? But when you get them to talk to each other, and the kid goes, yeah, me and my family went to Greece, and oh, really? No. You're like, man, I just said the same thing. You didn't get it. Because they learn from each other more than they would ever learn from an adult. And that has to do, again, it's a chemical thing. They look at you, you're the old man. When I first started teaching at 27 years old, at 27, I was the old man. At 27. Right. And I came in thinking, oh, I'm young. They're going to really be able to connect. I'm going to connect with the kids. No, they didn't think I was from Baltimore. The first place I taught was Baltimore. They thought I was from the suburbs.
From
I said,
where?
guys, they thought I was from the suburbs, from suburbia.
Okay.
I said, no, I was born right on this street. Yeah. Right. Because of age, and let's be real, they haven't met, they never really met people that looked like them that could speak like that. Because even some of the teachers who didn't leave the neighborhood and went to local schools, they still talk like them. Right. And I kind of lost that. Well, I never really had it because my father didn't allow me to speak a certain way. So I never really had it because he modeled the correct way to speak. So all of these things are important. Grammar. This is why, now we know we just went through that painful grammar boot camp, right? Reading is where we teach grammar. Because we can identify grammatical points in the reading, and it makes more sense because it's connected to everything else. It's connected to how they pronounce in the words. It connects to definition. It connects to the lexis, the chunk of words, the key words in context, if you remember, quicks, if you remember. So those chunks of words are important. Because with those chunks of words are normally in a grammatical structure.
Right.
So if you teach grammar while you're teaching reading, grammar makes more sense.
Absolutely.
Grammar should never be isolated from teaching reading. And I've been saying this at my university And they wonder why they give the kids all these grammar courses, and then they wonder why the students still can't write. You cannot isolate it. It has to all be comprehensive. Grammar has to be, you can isolate speaking and listening, okay. But grammar should be integrated into the reading and writing course. The grammar, it should all be integrated, right? With writing be the last thing we do. We're going to talk about writing in our next session. Okay, so we can, while we're teaching reading, we should be teaching grammar, and believe it or not, and even mechanics, because we know that mechanics can help enhance reading. We went through this. Remember when we were talking about relative clauses, and we were talking about which and putting a comma in front of which?
Right.
Remember?
Yeah.
Now imagine if you're a student, and then the teacher goes, notice, you read and you're reading a part of the text, and the teacher goes, notice there's a comma in front of which. Now let's look at the context of what's going on here. Now notice that bit of information is not really essential to the main idea.
Right.
That's why we put the comma in front of the which, because that's telling the reader that this part of information is really not that important. It's just additional. Isn't that much more effective than trying to teach a student relative clauses isolated from a story? Okay, you use which, and this is a non-restrictive clause, and this is a restrictive clause, and this is for additional information, and this is for necessary information. Huh?
Right.
But if you're teaching it in a reading selection, and you say, look at this. Now tell me, is that really important to what was going on in the rest of the paragraph? No, that wasn't really, because it's additional. So that's why we put the comma there. And so when you want to add additional information, just use which. And then if the information is necessary, go ahead and put that there. You use that tells you that information is necessary to the whole situation that's going on.
Right.
And that sticks in the reader's mind, in the young learner's mind, and they will remember that forever. And then they'll be able to transfer that over to their child. Well, I don't know. We got a restrictive clause. I mean, a test on complex sentences. I don't understand this restrictive clause. It's easy. Then you go back to the lesson that Dr. Kassan gave you, right? Oh, yeah. And that's parents. Because sometimes we can do it based on better than the teacher sometimes, right? So that's why teaching grammatical points is so essential inside a reading selection, not separate from it. The other aspect that we want to consider is focus, front-loading questions. We saw that in the teaching listening, right? Front-loading the questions, right? Because when you front-load the questions, you're able to make helping the student, guiding the student to see why this should be interesting, why I'm reading this, why do I need to read about 18th century Russian czars? Why is this important? So that front-loaded question can stimulate me to read the text.
Right. It's also what you said earlier about the expectation, what to expect.
What to expect.
Right. What to look out for. It helps guide the activity. In medical school, we front load the questions also for the lecture that's coming up. So usually we'll start out by asking the class, now, does anybody remember this or that, or what do you know about this? What do you know about that? We give them a few things, and then we say, okay, and then we start. Unfortunately, in some contexts, in med school, they will give you what's known as a pre-quiz. I don't know if you ever had to go through something like that. In some classes, the major classes, they will give you what's known as a pre-quiz and a post-quiz, and they tell you from the beginning of the year that you have to come in ready for class. Then you take class, and then before you leave class, you have to also know the information. I mean, basically, they want to make sure that by the time you leave that class, you have that stuff down. And it was very difficult, those types, because that was an assessment. See, it wasn't just a pre-assessment for the teachers. No, no, it wasn't for their pleasure or their practice of teaching. It was an actual assessment for you as a student. So that's difficult, right? But it did do one thing, though. I'll tell you one thing. It made us read ahead of class a lot, and we would walk into class and we would actually have questions prepared, in your notes. You already with them, and the discussion in class, of course, goes from this level to like this level. You know, very high end discussion. So I don't know. I mean, whether it was good in a way, because like I can still remember those classes really well. But I guess at that level, you really don't. Although what's in it for me and personal interest and all of these things are very important for learning, but I think that there was a lot of things in with those types of classes where it's just there's nothing he's gonna. I mean, it was very difficult for them to make it interesting for you. When you're looking at like the nucleus of a cancer cell. I mean, the whole idea of cancer may be interesting, but once you get into it and start to read the terminology, which is like, these 17 letter words and, that are divided with numbers and X's and Y's and letters, they're very difficult to pronounce. You have nothing to do but to memorize it. You can try to understand why they put it together. You can try that helps, right? You can understand some of the suffixes, the prefixes. That helps a lot. But eventually, or at the end of the day, a lot of the words why are they like that? Because whoever discovered them just called them Lewy bodies. Why? Because his name was Louis, Yeah, but, I mean, Louis doesn't make sense. This is a protein in the brain. Why are you calling it a Louis? But it's just the way it is. So, and Heinz body.
And there's something to that. And it goes back to the sight words. There's some things you just need to memorize. Memorization, sometimes I have to catch myself because we talk so poorly about memorization, but memorization is an intellectual trait. It's a part of your IQ, being able to remember, and it's very important. It's not the only thing, but in this, you can argue what the critical level is. But if a person is not able or doesn't commit certain things to memory in their long-term memory, they're going to have struggle with advanced higher order ideas and concepts.
Right.
Which to your point, if we think about what most teachers do even today, when they give a reading assignment to students, where do they put the question?
At the end. They tell you answer this after you finish.
At the end. And there's no real value there. There's no real value there, because we're not doing all those things that will enhance the student reading, understanding what they're reading, being able to do things what they read, and synthesizing and evaluating. The ability that exercise of prediction and guessing is very important, because it builds their inference skills, which is needed for a higher order task, the ability to infer. Once they read and you front load the questions and you do all those things and you hit grammar points and you make all these different considerations, they need to be able to apply what they read. So they need to be able to do something with what they read.
Okay.
So we don't just say, turn to page 149, answer the questions in 150. Oh, great, you did a great job, Mohammed. and move on to the next thing. No, that's not teaching reading. Once we do that, then that's just the first part of the lesson and of that text. Now they need to be able to apply, moving them up Bloom's taxonomy. They need to be able to apply what they have read.
Are these like the types of exercises where I remember sometimes we'd have like a reading assignment, there would be underlined words and they would tell us, once you read it, what do these words mean? They throw them around a bit, we discuss them, and then they put them out. They tell you, okay, now put them in a sentence or use them in a context, in a certain, or make a story around them or something.
Yeah, that's application. Okay. That you can do that with the quicks, the words, the keywords and context, the contextual words. And you can also do the same thing with meaning. So you can say, Talal was the protagonist in this story. Can we make, how could we make Talal the antagonist of the story? Obviously that's a higher order question for maybe high school, but how can we make the Talal the bad guy? What could have happened, in the climax of the story? What would have happened if Talal went right instead of left? Right? Because now maybe based on the story, maybe that changes the meaning of the story and the outcome of the story. Right? It may even change the plot. Right? And it's key here that beyond the word thing, like you just mentioned, being able to pull those words and see if they can use it outside the context of the story. The key is whether we can get the student or the reader to somehow connect internally with the story. How can they apply themselves from a more relate to more of an ontology? Now we move into ontologies now. We maybe in the beginning we did with epistemologies, but now we're moving more towards ontologies. How can we extend it and make it relative to the reader? So they can, because if we're talking about constructivism, how can they create their own meaning out of this? Because that's what you really want. Because it's really not about the story, is it? Is it not? It's really not about the story or the text or about 18th century Russian czars. It's really about what the learner how can that learner can take that information and somehow use it and make it applicable to their lives. Can they make it relative to something they have experienced or something they want to experience? Oh, that reminds me of my uncle who ran this auto body shop. He was almost like a czar because he would, he used this strategy just like Nicholas the First, that's what we want. That's what we want. Because it's really not about the Russian czar to some kid in Detroit or some kid in LA. It's about how the meaning and the outcome of the story is applicable to their own lives and they can synthesize that information to make it relative to themselves. All right, so after they apply, we need to have a writing activity. So this is when writing comes into the mix. Okay. This is where writing comes into the mix. So as you can see, teaching listening, teaching speaking, teaching reading, teaching writing, these are all integrated concepts. We don't teach these in isolation. So we can, if we talk about 18th century Russian czars, we can take it from a listening activity to a speaking activity to a reading activity to a writing activity.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So after we get them to Ray, you hear your mother's. Let's go. After they read, after they can do an activity where they able to synthesize it and move towards that ontology, now they are prepared to write. And that writing should be an extension of that ontology. So they're personalizing the writing. Yeah, I remember a time when, you know, my uncle owned a auto body shop, and he reminded me of Nicholas the First. Right? Now, the writing activity, depending on what's going on, it does not necessarily have to be individual. It can be a collaborative activity.
Okay.
Can be. So it could be, you can have them do a group activity where they talk about somebody in the school or somebody in the neighborhood or somebody that they know that reminds them of an 18th century Russian czar. It all depends on, and then if you want to move to a personalized writing activity, you can do that too. The key is that everyone should have to write something, a sentence, and then, you know, that's for the teacher to set those rules on what, you know, what role people have in that group. Or it could be an individual writing activity. I just wanted to point that it does not have to be that it doesn't always have to be a personalized individual writing activity. It can be a collaborative effort.
What are those activities where they tell you, like they'll share a story, right? Let's say somebody's talking, like you said, somebody's talking, you know, I want to share like the stories about somebody narrating a story about their uncle, right? And then you read that in class, and then at the end of the class, the teacher will say, okay, write a story about somebody who was important in your life, for example. Is that similar to what we're doing here, or is that like are we at another level or doing something else?
So the question, if it's connected to the reading activity, it would be write a story about somebody who reminds you of an 18th century Russian czar, or or something that happened in the text. Write a story about a leader who made a brash decision, right? You know, it has to be connected. It should be connected somehow to a main theme of the text. Because remember, you know, we're trying to draw the main meaning, the main
That's
idea.
constructivism, yeah? That's
Yeah.
constructivism.
That's constructivism. Building meaning, right? Building meaning, that we build meaning, that we build understanding, we build our own knowledge. That's constructivism. Social constructivism is that when you do it collaboratively, right? We build knowledge together. Constructivism by itself is we build knowledge and perceive knowledge, and we build our knowledge individually. So interesting enough, Montessori, I know you know about Montessori, right? Maria Montessori, her model is a constructivist model where learners play individually to gain ideas and concepts, right? Key competencies that are important for their growth. The Finns, because if you look at the Finnish model and Montessori, you say, well, they look both very similar. The difference, the Finns are more a social constructivist, where they do playtime together, right? And that's why people may have issue with the Finns, because when you do it, when it's more collaboratively, you can't set those measurable outcomes. So when you start to talk to them about outcomes, they kind of back away from you, like, oh, no. And that's when they get into this transversal competency thing. Whereas if you do it individually, you can set clear outcomes for the individual, right? Okay. Now, after they did a reading activity, now they need to reread.
Okay. After the activity.
They need to reread. They're rereading for main idea. Because at this point,
after the writing assignment?
Because the first part was more connecting with the text. Now we want to make sure They understand what the main idea is. They understand the details that support the main idea. This might be a good idea for them to extend and go deeper in the text about why certain things socially happen and why the czar did certain things, or why the protagonist did this or the antagonist did this, and they can go and talk about the social implications during that time and why this was appropriate during that time. So they go deeper. So the rereading is about going deeper. Now, whereas the first one was more ontology, I remember my uncle being like Nicholas I. The second reread is more epistemology, where they're looking for historical facts or draw historical connections. And again, they can work together in this effort. So as you can see, these are great opportunities. The reread is a great opportunity to do a project-based learning or problem-based learning. So problem-based learning, you can talk about, global warming or the energy crisis, and then turn that into a problem-based learning activity, or for younger kids, a project-based learning activity. But the reread is more on epistemology, researching for those main ideas, why going deeper into the epistemology, why was it appropriate for the czar to say this to his wife, right? Why was it appropriate for the 14-year-old prince to travel to Greece away from his parents at 14? Why was that appropriate at 14, right? And the students would go out and find, the social structure at that time and be able to communicate what was going on to further explain the text. So the reread is about going deeper into the text from an epistemological standpoint. Okay. Yeah, that's it. I think my last statement in my notes here is the key to reading is focusing on the important concept, the reason why the readers are reading that text. So that means you need to consider the wants, needs, and expectations of your students, who your students are. We're going to have a class on learner profiling. This is what makes learner profiling important, because we want them to read things that are relevant, that matter, right? And not just read just anything that's coming down the pipe. So the key to reading is focus and previewing all the things we talked about, right? Making sure they can pronounce the words, make sure they understand the lexicons, all those important things. So they know, as you stated earlier, what to expect, what they're going to encounter. So teaching reading is not a 10-minute activity, as you can see. It is a long process. So that means we have to have the time to do it, right? So maybe we, find something, a short 2-paragraph, 1-paragraph text, so they can really, instead of giving them a 5-page deal, you give them something short but has rigor to it, depending on the grade level you're teaching. Because if you give them 5 pages, that's going to be too much to digest. Maybe even a whole page might be too much to digest, right? But these are decisions and considerations that
it depends on who you're teaching. Yeah.
Who you're teaching. These are considerations the teacher has to make.
Right. Yeah.
That is teaching reading.
Okay. Very good. Excellent. So how long do you have to? How long are you going to do this How's the burn coming along? How's the skin?
So when I
Just
look at
red
it
and
today, it
pink?
was pink. It was
Pink.
pink. It was like
Super red.
white. It's like white pink, like white
Okay.
pinkish. So,
All
and
right.
it was kind of deep. It's kind of deep. But she took my fingers to start ripping the deer skin off. I was like, lady.
Yeah, it has to come off. But she didn't do any. She didn't like. Usually, well, sometimes it sticks to the bandage itself. So I don't know. Is that gauze with Vaseline?
No,
Is the
so
gauze made with Vaseline? Yeah.
the first 2 days she put this white cream on it. It begins with
Okay.
an F. And she
Okay.
said that was to soften the bag.
Okay.
And that was, I think that's what allowed her to be able to rip it off. Today
Okay.
she put something like Vaseline or something on it,
All right.
on the netting.
I don't know if you can see the
On the
netting.
netting. Yeah.
Yeah. Today she put a
Sometimes it
netting
comes
on.
ready like that. But you saw her put it because usually it can actually it can just come with it. She put it on. Okay.
Yes, no, I think the grease was already on it because it was a special pack, and I think it was
Right,
already. But
exactly.
she was rubbing
Okay.
it in.
Okay.
I could tell it was
All
like
right.
some grease, and then
Right.
she put it on the wound, bandaged it up, and so
Actually,
I don't have.
that grid formation is so that your skin gets stuck to it. By the way, it makes it easier to rip off. You notice
Really?
like the way the material, it's like gridded, right? It's not
Right.
exactly like soft cotton or anything. It's the reason that they do that is air, right? And number two is also to allow better absorption. Number three, because when it grows or when the bad skin will get stuck to it. So when they come to take it off, it should come off even with the bandage.
The bandage.
Yeah.
Oh, this one didn't come off with the bandage. I think they put so much cream on it that it didn't come off with the.
Then that's maybe why they put it. I'm saying that's why they put the Vaseline is to prevent that from being ripped off. But it's a two-way. By the way, there's a theory that says no, let it, because it's easier if I just take it off while I'm unbandaging instead of doing that and then saying just wait a second, taking off a layer.
No, she took scissors and was cutting and ripping. I was like, come on, you're killing me over here. And then she put the peroxide, whatever it is, the solution in soap and water and
Peroxide.
Yeah. So yeah.
Well, you're talking earlier about you were talking about language. So the left side of the brain has this place called the Broca's area, right? And by the way, one of the ways that they understand how the brain works is because they observe disorders of the brain, and then they just look for what part of the brain is not working and what does it look like, and that must be responsible for that. So there's this thing that happens with people who have strokes. One of them is called Broca's aphasia, which occurs when there's a left-sided stroke. Basically, it's a non-fluent aphasia, meaning that I can understand what you're saying, but when I come to reply to you, I can't put words together. Okay. Then there's one that occurs on the right side of the brain. It's called a Wernicke's aphasia. And that one is a fluent aphasia, wherein I can speak really good, but whatever's coming out of your mouth, I don't understand it.
Right.
It's very very complex. Language is actually very complicated, and you're right about that. And
do you believe that Elon Musk's deal that when he's going to plant, he has that company, what is it, Neuralink, right? Neuralink.
Yeah.
Is that good science or is that quack science?
He said he's gonna link his brain with something. Is that what he's claiming?
No, what he's saying, he has a company called Neuralink, and they're supposed to be pushing it out soon where they're implanting, I guess, electrical in the brain itself. And he's saying that it's gonna allow the brain to heal itself, solve cancer, fix cancer. He's saying that he's claiming that the science behind it is that it's gonna train the brain to fix problems that the body is having. So if you have a stroke, this implant in your brain is supposed to allow you to be able to understand and speak well. And it's this company Neuralink.
In terms of implants, the last thing I read about implants, brain implants. So they have this implant for people who suffer from like Parkinson's disease, which
Right.
is basically the part of their brain is not functioning well because it's missing a neurotransmitter, which is a chemical that's produced in the brain. And they had this experiment where they did put something in the brain that sort of improved the physical activity of the person. And there is some evidence that there are some sensors or these electrophysiologic points or electrical points that they put in the brain inside that assist with that. And it started peripherally with the arms, where they would connect the shoulder to the arm of somebody who's hemiplegic. And then suddenly, if you move your shoulder, your arm will go up. You know what I mean? It would help them with things like that. Or if they tuck their shoulder in, it'll do this action. And they found it's good for holding a cup, trying to get dressed. Small things like that. They were able to do it, and they have something called the bionic arm, which is even another revolution that they pushed forward. They're trying, but billions and billions of neurons hooked together, right, by these chemical / physical, like you can consider them like little copper wires, but they're not copper. They're nervous fiber. Just think of, if you just go back and think, what is emotional memory? Why is it that we memorize? Sometimes we have things in our memory, smells, for example. When you smell, you suddenly develop an emotion. Where does that
Yes.
go? That goes in that's a whole part of the brain also in the middle here that connects all of it. And nobody understands anything about it aside from there are some chemicals in that area, but it really matters where that chemical goes and doesn't go. And so, people like Elon Musk, he likes to sensationalize things, and he's trying to be like get people to think out of the box a bit, and tries to support things that are these like outrageous ideas. I would assume that's how his company works. Like he'll come in and say, "Listen, we gotta get to the moon in about 20 seconds. Can we do it?" I mean, like he'll give them a challenge like that just so that they can sort of get somewhere. But let's put it like this. Remember that company Thanos? You probably heard of this lady.
Yeah. The lady who, she screwed everybody. She said that the blood, take a drop of blood and
everything.
Tell you.
Right. Now, technically, when you come to think of it, why were people duped into it? Because it sounded logical.
Right.
I mean, I give my blood in the clinic and they can tell me, and then they need another sample. The only thing she said is, look, all I need is one sample and I can test for all of this stuff, right? And wouldn't that be beautiful? Wouldn't it be beautiful if it was just this one device that would revolutionize medicine the world over? That would not only, and it wouldn't affect, by the way, richer countries as much as it would affect poorer countries, right? Who cannot do multiple testing. So you can imagine like suddenly healthcare in Africa would get a boost, because from the day the child is born, you would know what are the metabolic diseases, what neurologic diseases are they prone to, what are their allergies, all of that would be in this one test that was done. So it does make sense, but then look at it, we can't even do that. We're not there yet.
We're not there yet. So you think Elon is quack medicine at this point, or just?
If he can reproduce in the lab neurologic tissue, and if he can implant it, if he can get that type of technology, that would be wonderful. That'd be great. If he can just get it to work at like above 95%, because all of this implant, whatever, etc., the statistics are still too low for like the FDA to say, okay, we can have it done normally, or the world will adopt it. It still has a high failure rate. And I think that what the people who really need something now would be people who suffer spinal cord injuries, because there's absolutely nothing out there. But there's this glimmer of hope coming out of India, where they basically said, we don't have a problem with stem cells. We're not going to stop. And basically now all of this part of Africa, anybody with a spinal cord injury will go to India and have an implant done. And I've spoken to people who have had it, and they tell me the improvement is not what you like. You're not going to come back walking, but there's like this 30% improvement in your ability. Now, of course, it still remains to be seen. Is this a placebo effect? because we do physiotherapy all the time, and all the time, you always know as a physiotherapist that you cannot affect the physical process of healing per se, but what you can do is you can utilize whatever is
Right.
left in the body and
Right.
focus. And like you said, when you said they say they touch and they do here, this touching is tactile stimulation and it's a feedback mechanism. So when I see that and I see the muscle and I feel it, right, I connect.
Right.
So I get a stronger, a better ability to perceive and to control. So that area is still open for some, for a good discussion and conversation. But yeah, I mean that's where the field is headed neurologically.
Well,
But you never know. Yeah, anything is possible. Hey, I think somebody said something about sticking the internet in their head or being able to control their search options, right? And this is actually something that they've been able to do. Like they can connect where your thoughts can control where you go, or I don't know. There was something like that I read about recently.
I truly believe that in the next 10 years, there won't be physical devices, that there'll be kind of like that Iron Man deal where this will be a service that you get from Mobile or AT&T, and it just, you won't need a physical device, and it will just kind of, you can see it. No one else can see it, but you can see it and you can make phone calls. And as long as you have the device, maybe you have an earpiece in your ear and you can do all this in the air. I really believe that technology is probably already here, actually.
Google, they have something. What's that? Those Google glasses. What do they do?
Google Glasses, yeah. So they do this. That's basically what Google Glasses do.
It
Right.
gives you the net, right? It gives you the internet on your
Gives
glasses.
you the internet. You can see everything. You can perceive the things. That makes predictions like AI. It didn't do well because I think that I think that it was before its time. Well before its time. But I think we won't need glasses. We won't need that device because people are not going to want to wear glasses. I think it's going to be a service that's connected to you biologically some way. So you're gonna have to give something to somebody, right? And it's going to be a service, and you pay your monthly bill, and you go, just like I can go, hey Bixby, tell me what the weather is today. You can be, hey Bixby, show me my screen. And the screen comes up, and you're going to be seeing people walking down the street doing this.
Right.
I
But only
didn't
they can see it.
understand that.
Huh?
But they're the only ones who will know what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, imagine 30 years ago, if somebody was talking to themselves walking down the street, you'd say that guy's crazy.
Right.
But now we see, people walking, talking. They're not talking to themselves, but they're talking to someone. And so the possibility, I really believe that's going to happen. That we're going to move away from physical devices, and because notice how these things are actually getting cheaper now, even though they're charging us more, but they're actually easier to produce and everything. And I think these are normally, that's a sign that something else is coming better down.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's gonna be interesting. I don't know. I have faith in Elon. I think I don't know why I have faith in him, but I think this Neuralink might work.
Yeah, but there's a lot of flack on him right now. Yeah. He's like trying to fire half a test of Twitter, and it's gonna affect a lot of people's jobs. What his restructuring and all of that.
But if you really look into the theory behind that, have you seen the lifestyle of the people who work at Twitter? Have you seen this thing? He's exposing
people.
He's saying that basically you don't need all those people to do that work. And number two, I think last week he said no more free food because they were spending $13 million in free food a year. Like one lady, I think before he took over, she did a TikTok of her day at Twitter. And she started her day like, oh, I've been working for Twitter for a year now, and this is my first day going into the office. and like, and she's never been in office before. And most of her day was relaxing. She got massage, free food, wine at the end of the day, and she did, and it was like, it's very weird. And, God bless her, good for being able to do that. But is that, should we be creating that expectation for humans? Because I think the core essence that makes our existence mean anything is working and hard work. And this idea that life is somehow supposed to be comfortable, I think that's what's going to inevitably kill us, because, necessity is the mother of all invention, right? And what drives often that necessity is hard work.
But work is being
and
redefined, right? What is work and
yeah,
how do people work? It's a
but it's to
it's
our
a system
detriment.
that,
But I think it's to our detriment. I think it's to our detriment, because I think
well, I don't
hard
know. I
work
mean,
is.
some of the stuff is pretty good. Like, yeah, you said the lady didn't come to work for a year, working from home and teleworking. This is something that's actually now becoming quite normal. Even in, believe it or not, I work for the humanitarian industry, and I'll tell you, in our industry, that has become a standard. People, certain jobs, certain roles are hooked up online. They have the technology is there. This is not 5 years ago or 10 years ago when you had some limitations in connections. Now you can have connections all over the world. They're hooked up and they do their job online, and they do their
But
meetings
what about
online.
the connecting, that physical connection, and which
Okay.
I know I'm being critical. I know I'm being
No,
being
you're right. That's very important.
I'm being a hypocrite, because I believe in online education, but also I think there's also something to be said when we work together and the connections that we make. I think, don't you think we're depleting humanity by being so far?
Nobody's no, nobody's telling you. Okay, the way it works is they don't tell you you have to work from home or that you have to be far. They tell you you have a choice. Usually it's for a certain number of days per week
Mhm.
where you can work from home, but they still
Mhm.
expect you to come to the office. I
Mhm.
can work from home for a lot of my stuff, but then there are some things I can't, because not everybody can connect online. Not everybody can contact me via a
Mhm.
connection, and telephone calls sometimes can do not you're not going to give that person enough room and space, and I can't see the body language, and some of the message gets lost. So definitely I can't do role plays and modeling, if I'm on screen. I have to be there. I have to see what's going on. So yeah, I mean, there is, but I'm just saying we have to also create room. We also have to create room for well-being. People are going through very difficult situations at times, very difficult situations. If you were to look at the laws, for example, um, I mean, I don't want to get in too far into it, but let's just today, what kind of leave can you take? So the leave you can take is if you're sick, you can take a few days off. If you're death of a loved one, like very close, immediate family, you have your annual leave, right? And then you have the government holidays and stuff. But
And
there are other
maternity leave,
situations, maternal leave,
maternity.
paternal leave. Right. And paternal leave until today is ridiculous. And most laws, there's no such thing, or it's 1 or 2 days.
Mhm.
While in more advanced countries, it's the same amount of time as maternal leave. By the way, it's like 4 to 6 weeks, something like that.
But
There's
even in those advanced companies, the CEOs and the leaders really frown upon it, right? So there's a cultural thing. Oh, you're going to take paternal leave? It's really frowned upon by CEOs and leadership.
sometimes I found some leaders, or they're not really leaders, they're managers, right? And basically, they frown upon anything that doesn't serve their bottom line. And there has to be in any successful organization, you're going to have people who think like that, but you need to balance it. It's not bad to have somebody who thinks like that, but you need a balance on the other side, and there has to be a framework that everybody agrees on. So then,
Mhm.
whether they like it or not, it gets done. This is the limit. Maybe they wanted it to be 4 weeks or 8 weeks, and then the law, by the way, comes in here. It solves the
Mhm.
issue. The labor law of the country, wherever it is, there's stipulations there that allow for these types of situations. Then you have, for example, now people are talking about what about people who lose children, couples who lose their children, you know, miscarriages. This is first of all, it's something that people don't want to talk about, so they don't necessarily want to take a health certificate. I have an opinion about even taking a normal certificate that says I have tonsillitis to my staff health representative. And I've told them before, I've told them, actually, as a physician, you should know that there's a high level of confidentiality granted to the patient, whereby
Right.
they are not obliged by any means ethically to disclose their medical condition to you, whoever you are, whatever, whatever sort of powers you've been granted. All right. It doesn't give you the right to actually tell people what's wrong with you. Why are you sick? And the
Right,
reason you're
exactly.
asking is not because you give a damn about me. You're asking because you want to make sure that my diagnosis sort of fits your time scale of how much time I can take off.
Right.
So now there's people who are actually saying there should be some allowance for days to be taken with no reason.
Mhm.
And this can be cases like that, miscarriage. This can be cases of women who are undergoing menopause, who
Mhm.
also can be suffering from symptoms that they don't want to discuss, and it comes and it goes. It's not very stable. So
Right.
there's this well-being is very important. So one of the ways that you can sort of and what they found out also about working from home is that if you're able to have the right infrastructure, you actually, one of the problems we had was we had people who were working from home, but they were not working 8 hours. They were working 12 hours. We had to do a
They're working hard.
training. We had to have a training which said stop.
Right.
Basically, we
Right.
told them you put the timer at that
Right.
time, you shut off your computer, because we were having people who were doing 10 hours, 11 hours, and they weren't complaining. But we were saying that this is not actually helpful. You will burn out eventually, even though you're
Right.
working from home. Yeah.
Right. And but I think most people, I think Elon will say that, and that one CEO who fired, remember that one CEO who fired everybody over Teams or Zoom or whatever, they would
Yeah.
argue that that's your example is the exception, not the rule, and that most people are actually stealing and cheating the company. They're doing, 3 hours, 3 hours. But ultimately, and I agree with you in that we shouldn't be worrying about how many hours somebody puts in a day. You should be worrying about how productive they are. Are they meeting
Absolutely.
the company goals? So if I can get the work done in 1 hour, what does it matter if I'm there the rest of the day or not? If I'm accessible, if you need me, I can pick up the phone or answer an email. But if I'm more productive, why do I need to sit, whether in my home or in a cubicle? So I get that from that perspective. And I agree with it because I had jobs outside of teaching and in healthcare, the insurance side of healthcare, where I literally worked 2 hours a day, and nobody cared as long as I was making my numbers and being productive. So I get it. I definitely get it.
Elon himself is being quite a hypocrite. If that's their problem, or people like Elon, if that's their problem, first of all, they work in an industry that relies on talent, and it relies on creativity and innovation. And the buck is not per hour. Okay, the payment is not. It's not per. It's like per patent, or per idea. And I mean, just come to think about it, if I love that poster where it shows these African women who are carrying these huge sacks. You know how they carry them on their head, and they're wearing that cloth with the baby on the back.
Right.
And they're going up this mountain, right? This mountain, the side road of a mountain, and the caption says, if wealth was the product of hard work, every woman in Africa would be a billionaire.
Right.
So
Right.
that
No,
1 hour that one person in Silicon Valley puts, that one
right.
hour they do, that 1 hour, right? If it comes out, the product of that 1 hour, if it comes out to solve an equation, solve a problem on Windows, or solve an accessibility issue, or a thought for an app, right?
Mhm.
That's it. That will make the company enough money for it to run its engine, for the rest of the year for all 10,000 employees. That 1 hour of investment. That's why they sort of like cuddle them up and bundle them up, and there's not many people who can do the work they do. And look, they would be doing that to all of us. right? Because I mean, I think people are people. I don't think they brought anything new. I think the more exclusive your skill is, the more you will be getting those massages when you come into the office and just chill and do all of that. You know, that's what it would look like to somebody from outside,
But
and that's what they're
I
trying
think
to
I look
attract
at it
people.
from I look at it for like teachers. Teachers don't have that luxury to get massages,
No,
and they're the ones that
no, you don't.
deserve
No,
to.
no. Of course.
You know,
Yeah. Yeah, of course,
and
of course.
I think that's where the imbalance comes in. And again, at the end of the day, life is not fair. But it seems to me, it seems to me that there are people who, police officers, doctors, nurses, uh, teachers, construction workers. So you hear, and then you hear this very privileged, entitled 23-year-old talking about, she's going to have a free red wine after a day of massages and playing foosball. You go, this don't seem right. About something seems like we're going the wrong way. In many ways, again, I'm not hating her on her or this or people who experience that, but it seems like humanity is going the wrong way, in that we're going to eventually lose our ability to thrive.
Yeah, but
Right.
that's
So when
just
are we
humanity
concerned
in
about
San Francisco, man. That's in Silicon Valley, San Francisco. That's the humanity in San Francisco. The rest of the world is nowhere. They're
right? That's
they're
true.
they're in
But,
trouble.
but doesn't the rest of the world want that? Isn't the rest of the world aspiring to do the same thing and duplicate that Silicon Valley lifestyle?
I don't know. That's a hard question. I would say that the rest of the world. That's a big question. I don't know. I'd love to go and play foosball, but I have trainings to do, so I can't. They're time intensive. They don't depend. I don't need to. There's no
So
creativity
then,
coming in.
I
I have a
guess
big team I work with.
my point is that's Elon's point, right? Elon's point maybe that, hey, look, just because we are creative driven and idea driven, that we should join the rest of the world in this idea of hard work. That we shouldn't be spoiled, entitled brats. That we should, and then I'm not going to pay for you to play foosball.
Well, then let's wait and see what happens to Twitter down the road. Either
But
he makes
and
or
maybe
breaks.
and maybe he's just trying to intentionally tank Twitter. That could be another option too. He's trying to tank it. Remember, he really didn't want the company in the first place. I think he put his foot in his mouth. Unless he's going to use Twitter to link up with his Starlink company and with Tesla, which to provide services for Tesla and Starlink, because he has the internet company now.
Yeah.
Unless he has some grand plan to connect Twitter with his other companies, I'm still trying to figure out how is he monetizing Twitter? Because does Twitter generate that much ad revenue?
No, but wasn't his first idea he wanted to charge people? The first thing he came out with, he was like, let's charge people for certain services, and people were like, that's charged.
Yeah, but how many? Yeah, but how many people are gonna pay $8? I think it's $8 for verified. I mean, how many people? Number one, Twitter is something I don't even understand. I don't understand how Twitter operates. I don't use it because I don't understand it. I think it's social media for more younger people, because I definitely don't understand how to follow people. I don't understand. I mean, I know how to follow people, but I don't understand how the algorithm works with Twitter. Facebook algorithm is pretty straightforward. TikTok's algorithm, even Instagram's, but TikTok seems to be a very weird algorithm. And so I don't even understand it. So I'm still trying to figure out how he's monetizing it, unless again he's going to connect it with Starlink and Tesla, and maybe even Neuralink,
Has he been able to figure out how many fake accounts are on Twitter? Because that was his first.
Yeah, I think that was his excuse to try to use. He said that it was like I forgot the number. I think he tried to make the excuse. It was like 3 billion, something. It was something. I forgot what the number is. Maybe 3 billion is off, but it was 3 million fake accounts or whatever it was. But that was his excuse to kind of worm out of the deal. which didn't fly. I don't know. It's gonna be interesting. But as we know, whatever he does now really affects markets. So he's not a joke because he sends one tweet out and it turns the market into, he can create a tornado in the market. So in that regard, you know, he's very, he's very influential. And now that what we know about FTX, he may have saved a lot of people money with crypto, with his crypto tweets, because we just found. Are you reading about FTX?
No.
It turns out it was the biggest crypto Bitcoin brokerage. Turns out it was a total scam. $10 billion, $10 billion company. It was a total scam. The whole scam. It was a whole pond. It's the guy that they have investigating, and they have a special investigator. He's supposed to be some high speed. He used to work for Hague, and he wrote that it's bigger than Enron. If you remember Enron,
Yeah,
he says this Ponzi scheme is. He says it's bigger than the guy that had the big Ponzi scheme, bigger than his.
Madoff.
Madoff. I thought he had the funniest name because he made off with people money.
Yeah, it's fit. It had a great movie about him. What's his name? Robert De Niro. I don't know if you watched it. It was all about this guy and how he started and how he ended up. Okay. All right. So
All right.
when's our next?
So when's our next? Yeah, when's our next?
I don't know. You tell me.
We
This
can
week I'm pretty good. Yeah.
we can shoot tomorrow.
All right. Tomorrow would be the 22nd. Okay.
If that's good with you.
All right,
Or Wednesday I have a talk with parents at that school I'll tell you about.
No, tomorrow's okay.
Okay. We'll shoot 6
yeah.
o'clock tomorrow.
Yeah, okay. We'll shoot for 6 o'clock tomorrow. Okay.
Tomorrow will be teaching writing.
Teaching writing.
And then after that, we don't have that much more to do. We gotta go learner profiling, appropriate language. We're almost at the end.
All right. Okay. All right then.
All right.
See you tomorrow, and get better, and hopefully all will be good.
Yeah. Lesson learned. Lesson learned.